This is Tony Sweet, and we are here for another version of this amazing month because we have so many speakers from Contact in the Desert. I'm Tony Sweet. Captain Ron couldn't be here today, but we know he's going to be back this Friday. We have a couple of other shows that we're going to be doing with Contact speakers, and we want to bring these speakers to you in case you can't make it, and we want to make you a part of this. But today we have a wonderful guest. He is a first-time Truth Be Told guest, but Michael Johnson, Dr. Michael Johnson, is a retired psychiatrist from the clinical and academic orbits surrounding Harvard. You might have heard that little school. He became interested in alien visitations, abductions, after debriefing a patient of Dr. John Mack. He's deceased, a Harvard psychologist or psychiatrist known for his studies of abductees. Having read Van Daniken, we just had him on the show, Eric Van Daniken, as an undergrad, Johnson maintained an interest in UFO phenomenon and has been a member of Contact in the Desert community for the last 6 years. So please welcome to Truth Be Told, the one and only Dr. Michael Johnson. How you doing, sir?
Hello.
Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
We always get excited because we don't get a lot of in-studio guests because most of our guests from overseas or East Coast or Midwest.
Love to be here.
So I'm going to get right into it. And it's always fascinating to find out how people get involved into their craft and get involved in not necessarily the psychiatry part of it, but you actually got to work with Dr. John Mack. Yes. And you were doing a lot of his debriefing of patients.
Yeah.
Could you tell us during the debriefing, how did you get interested? Because at the time, it probably was just a job.
Well, I did read Van Daniken when I was an undergraduate.
Right.
And so that sort of triggered the interest. And I was in practice in Bloomington, Indiana for a while, and I took care of a very famous patient. And because of that, I was invited to Harvard to begin practice there. So I was in practice in Cambridge, and John was chief of psychiatry at Brigham at one of the hospitals there, and I got to know John through hospital rounds, and he heard of my reputation. I apparently am a good diagnostician, and so I helped to screen people where they need to assess how things are going. John was he was a person who's very scrupulous in his work. He was actually he was chief of psychiatry actually at Cambridge Hospital and Harvard Medical School, where I got to know him. And John called me one day and he said, "Mike, I've got this unusual case, and I'd like for you to screen it.
Right.
She's reporting an abduction or in a visitation, actually. So would you see her?" And I said, "Sure, John, I'd be happy to see her," because I'd never heard of such a thing except for, from Van Daniken. So I saw this woman, and she was a woman in her probably late 30s. She was a network anchor at that time.
Oh,
Boston.
really? Okay.
A very intelligent woman, very successful, quite sane, and she reported a visitation in her Cambridge apartment, which was actually not too far from the office. What she described was very hard for me to believe. Basically, my interest is really in neuroscience, and so I took the history, and what she reported was that she was in her apartment. It was late in the morning. She was having coffee at her kitchen table, and she said that a craft landed in the patio back of her apartment. She saw 3 aliens walk through the walls. She lost consciousness at that point. She then awoke. She was on her kitchen table. The aliens were putting small instruments through her abdomen, and she could feel them inside. It was very quick, and she said it was entirely painless. She felt simultaneously a sense of terror because she was
I would too.
totally,
Yeah.
totally passive, and yet she felt completely safe and even comforted by the aliens. Then she lost consciousness again, and as she woke up on her kitchen table, she sat up and saw the aliens go through her walls to the craft and have the craft disappear. That was the story she gave. And I believed her. She was sane and told this story that convinced me.
But how did, as a psychiatrist, how did you determine? Because is it because of her profession, or was it the way she told the story? Because if somebody else told you, you might have said these people are crazy or mental issues.
When you're doing psychiatry, you really have to take a position we call pure phenomenology. That is, we do not have any preconception about whether a person's sane or not sane. We simply hear the story out and see if it fits patterns that we have. Now, at that point, I was in my 50s, and I had 15 years of psychiatric experience.
Right.
And furthermore, I was getting awards from the medical school for my teaching and understanding about complex problems. So you learn to depend on your pattern recognition. And you get very sensitive to subtle changes in the way people describe a story. And her story was entirely credible. And John thought so too. And she is, in fact, one of the cases published in one of his books. He wrote 2 books, one called Abduction.
Right.
And that was 100 cases of experiences. And then he wrote another book called Passport to the Cosmos, which is another 100 cases.
And so in these 100 cases that you put in the book, there's probably quite a bit more cases that you've done. But in those cases, was there a similarity that you saw in pretty much every case? And then on the opposite side, what was some of the most unique ones where you still believe them, but it was kind of unique in their story?
I didn't see all of John's patients. So there were several psychiatrists who were backing up his practice. So he was quite scrupulous about that. I saw, of his cases, I saw 4, and this was the only case I heard that I thought was credible. The other 3, to me, seemed I got back to him and I said, John, I'm just not sure here.
Right.
I wouldn't add this to your caseload.
So that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
And what was his response? Did he feel the same, or did?
No, John respected my work, and he took my opinion. I'm sure he made other opinions of his own and probably selected cases I didn't know.
Right.
But
right.
The one that convinced me was that case.
So this pretty much started you on your journey with abductees and being a believer.
Yeah. I have maintained a cautious skepticism still. I'm from Indiana,
right.
So in Indiana, from the Midwest, you have to see the evidence.
Right.
And
right.
in science, we have to see the evidence.
And so once you worked with John and kind of went on your own, did you still see abductees, or did you?
No, I did not.
You did not. And when did you finally reconnect to working, with abductees, or did you ever again?
Well, I did 2 years of military service in the Naval Reserves, and I was in Portsmouth Naval Hospital. I saw Marines and officers, and I'd hear pilots talking at the officers' bar, and pilots would say that they couldn't talk about bogeys, because bogeys, if you report a bogey right away, you weren't flying again.
Really?
Yeah. So this was, in the Navy we drank, and we'd get pretty drunk sometimes.
Right.
And these guys would talk. and we'd hear the stories, and that sort of convinced me to listen more carefully. I didn't reconnect to the UFO community until I joined the contact community. That was 6 years ago.
Wow, so there was a big difference in
there
time.
was.
So earlier we were talking about, I said when I was a child I saw a UFO, but also when I was a child I saw a spirit, ghost, whatever you want to call it. And so I've always thought, is there somewhat of a connection? Because the interdimensional, different realms, do you believe that there's maybe of a connection because they seem to communicate very similar?
My own thinking about this is such that I believe that current conscious thought is embedded in a larger non-local mind.
Mm-hmm.
So our individuated consciousness is only a fragment of a broad sea of awareness. And in that domain of awareness or consciousness, there are varieties of different entities.
Mm-hmm.
UFO or aliens are part of that expression. Spirits are another part of that expression. If you really consider what Michio Kiko is saying about 11 dimensions and that we exist only in 3 or 4, maybe 4 dimensions that we're aware of,
Mm-hmm.
then there are other intruding dimensions that we are part of but are not aware of. So even considering 5 dimensions, which is a pretty easy stretch for physics these days.
Right.
But going to 10, 11, what does that mean?
Yeah, and I know many people that we have interviewed, majority of the communication is never verbal. It's always mentally. And as a psychiatrist, do you think humans actually have the ability, because you were talking about squids, like octopus, how they communicate with their dyes, and birds with chirping and certain things. It's their communication. But with mostly aliens, it's always been mentally. Telepathic. Do you think the human beings have the ability to get to that point? Because it seems like they can communicate with us, and you figure if we can communicate, or they can communicate it with us, we somewhat have the ability to at least understand it.
There are 2 things that enhance one's telepathic ability, or we might say intuitive ability in a more classical sense.
Right.
One of the things that enhances it is meditation, regular meditation.
Right.
The other thing that unfortunately can generate powerful psychic ability is trauma. So people who are traumatized have higher relative brain DMT. DMT is a psychoactive agent. When we die, it goes up. When we're born, it goes up. People who have had their life threatened have endogenous higher DMT, and therefore they're much more psychic in a sense.
Right.
People who meditate on a regular basis have that same high level of DMT. So the arousal of DMT somehow sensitizes us to these different dimensions. I don't know how. I'm still a scientist asking questions mainly.
Right. But I think scientists ask questions always, no matter even if they find out the answer, they still have questions of why is the answer correct. Well, I know at Contact in the Desert, you're going to be doing a lecture, neuroscience and interdimensional communication, and I find this fascinating because interdimensional and neuroscience. Can you give us an explanation of what you're going to be talking about, and then give us a little more definition of what that means to
Well, you first of all have to ask yourself, what does communication mean?
Right.
I mean, if aliens are communicating with us other than telepathically, are they communicating in any other way? And people believe that crop circles are a natural vehicle that they're doing so. I was talking with Victoria Gavoyan last night, who runs Contact or produces Contact, and she was talking about visiting a crop circle two weekends ago. And we saw pictures of the crop circle, and they're obviously not man-made. The crop circles are apparently the way aliens are now communicating with us. One of the crop circles actually has been decoded, and there was a message: beware false gifts. That was the message.
Beware false
Beware
gifts.
false gifts. Who knows what that means? Nonetheless, so I started thinking, well, are there any species now which are communicating with us in a language we don't understand? Well, in fact, octopus may represent a current example. They live in an alien environment. They speak an entirely different language. They have a culture. They're smart. They use tools. Squids are like that. So then I started thinking of that movie with Amy Adams, Arrival.
Great movie.
A great movie.
Yeah, great movie.
So she's deciphering what the heptapods, they're called, are communicating with their logograms, L-O-G-O-grams, logograms, and they begin to decipher, and by deciphering them, Amy and her colleagues save the world. The notion of that kind of communication helped me to understand, well, yeah, there is some form of communication. I think crop circles are the ones that they're using.
And I think, as we go through all of the data of communications that we say ancient aliens or even aliens of modern day, they've communicated in so many different ways, through telepathic, through structures that have been built, through ancient, hieroglyphs. And do you believe that I don't know if this is your specialty, but do you believe that they travel through time travel, or do you believe that through? Because I've heard about remote viewing. Do they even need to come to our planet if their minds are so powerful? Can they remote view to our planet?
I wish I could know the mind of the alien, because
don't
if
you?
I did,
God.
I wouldn't be working.
No, right. But do you think that they could remote view and not even have to travel here? Do you think that?
I certainly believe that. I mean, we now know that the CIA uses remote viewing, so it's entirely possible that the aliens are too. I'm not sure why the physical visitations are necessary. Roswell was probably the hard example that we started us on this quest. I'm not sure.
Well, because to me, maybe that's if they can telepathic, they don't need to be right next to us. I don't know why they can't do telepathic messaging from another dimension, especially if they know how to tap into that.
I think if I was to presume, I imagine that they now understand that we're not hostile to them necessarily, and we now know that some of the species are not hostile to us. Currently, I think they're saying there are at least 5 or 6 subtypes of aliens,
right?
Maybe more. I heard 13 last year. So they communicate in different ways, I think. They have different agendas. But I think they know we're safe. We think they're safe now. We're working with them, probably. So I think they're now more comfortable showing themselves.
Right.
And certainly at Contact 2 years ago, my wife and a group of friends all observed a whole fleet of alien spacecraft come over Joshua Tree. It was amazing.
Yeah, I remember hearing about it. I didn't get to see it. Oh, Bonnie, did you see it? Oh, look at that. That's awesome. Well, especially at a contact conference.
Yes. Well, we're hoping this year, of course, because we're being particularly welcoming to them.
Well, hopefully, maybe it'll be the halftime show. That would be good. Let's talk about transdimensional travel. This is kind of similar to what we're talking about. I know in maybe your piece that you're going to be talking about at Contact. Can you talk a little more about transdimensional travel?
One of the things that I've done in preparation for this talk is to immerse myself in a conference that's been going on in Europe for some time, but we had a summer conference which was very intense, essentially about quantum physics and how such things as time travel is possible. As we look at the behavior of black holes, we see there is no time in black holes. At one side of the black hole, time travels one direction. At the other side, it travels another direction. So time travel is certainly possible. We certainly don't understand it. We're now theoretically exploring the idea. What happens when we have a memory? What happens when we connect with people we know we knew in a past life? Is that some kind of time travel? Right now there's a current bestseller on the New York Times list called, what's it called? Lost and Wanted. It's a book written by a woman who talks about living in a way that the fifth dimension intrudes in her life. She finds herself in the fifth dimension. So people are exploring these ideas. I've given up on my notion of time. It's certainly not the way I used to think about it, that's for sure.
Well, let's do a quick break because we always love to hear from our friend George Norrie about the upcoming Contact in the Desert. When we come back, we're going to dive into a little bit more about your lecture you're going to be talking about. And so for Tony Sweet and Captain Ron, we're going to be right back, but we have the one and only Michael Johnson in the studio with us. Thank you for being in studio. He's going to be doing a lecture coming up at Contact. On what day is it going to be on?
It's going to June the 2nd.
June the 2nd?
I'm an early morning speaker.
Oh, there you go.
Warm-up act for Nassim Haramein.
He's going to bring his juggling act, and yeah. All right, so don't go anywhere. This is Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. We'll be right back, and don't you go anywhere. There's so much to talk about.
Join me, George Norrie, in Indian Wells, California, for the 7th Annual Contact in the Desert UFO Conference, May 31st to June 3rd. Contact in the Desert is an epic weekend of adventure filled with exciting explorations into ancient aliens, human origins, crop circles, UFO sightings, disclosure, and the newest evidence of ongoing contact. This amazing weekend offers over 50 lectures, 40 workshops, 8 exciting panels, special events, and a luncheon that I'm hosting. Contact in the Desert also features leading experts including Giorgio Tsoukalos, David Wilcock, Linda Moulton Howe, Michael Tellinger, Eric von Daniken, Doc Wallach, and many more important researchers and scientists in the field. Contact in the Desert is your place for inside information. Join us at thecontactinthedesert.com to get your tickets today. It's time to make contact. That's contactinthedesert.com. Don't miss it. Contactinthedesert.com.
All right, we're back. This is Tony Sweet with Captain Ron. And we have Michael Johnson in studio with us, and he's going to be a contact. Please get your tickets, because if you can't make it, we're going to be there doing some live remotes, and we're going to be interviewing other people that are speaking and doing lectures. But if you can, get your tickets, fly out. You'll enjoy it. It's great to see these people in person. Michael, I want to talk about some of the abductions that you maybe have heard of. But did you hear? A lot of times it's the abductions go. They go and they get surgically implanted, but
Yes.
have you ever heard of any abductees doing time travel with the aliens, going to another dimension? Because it seems like they always just go to the ship, do what they need to do, and then they go right back home. Have you heard that?
I read Whitley Schreiber's recent book talking about his experience as a child and his early schooling in alien culture. Whitley's a brilliant writer. I was struck by the quality of his writing and convincing me that this man gives an honest report of a most extraordinary experience in which he travels in time and away from the earth and has a variety of experiences which are quite remote. So Whitley's probably the author I would go to if I was asking that question.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal speaker and just somebody that experienced being abducted. So fascinating man, and I think he just also wrote a book about his late wife and he being able to communicate with her in the other world, which is leading us, is kind of like I said, aliens and spirits. And I'm going to go back to your lecture, the neuroscience, and this is one part of your bio. It says, can current neuroscience help us understand how these phenomena of human consciousness and alien intelligence intersect? How can that be?
In my orientation to these questions, I have to ask myself, is there anything intrinsic in brain that would allow for telepathic communication or through... now we start having to invoke notions that Nassim Haramein is discussing, that is string theory and quantum theory, and how it may have some relationship to our biology. So I've been looking at the question of, are there structures in the brain that potentially are, if you will, transducers of that energy shift or quantum field shift. So in each cell of the body, there's a nucleus, and inside the nucleus there are structures that, and outside the nucleus there are structures that hold the cell together. And also, we think of cells as being very dynamic. They're living, so they're changing. And inside these cells are what are called microtubules. Microtubules are, now we're starting to get into nano-sized structures. So the inside of a microtubule can be anywhere between 5 and 35 nanometers long, and they change dimension, they change length, depending on what they're structured to do. Inside these microtubules are what are called lumens. These lumens are even smaller. They're between 7 nanometers and 10 nanometers. So we're starting to get down now into the quantum level. So somehow the Newtonian physics of the cell is embedded in the quantum physics. if you think of the size of a water molecule, and water is intrinsic to every cellular life, if you think of a water molecule, a water molecule is 0.3 nanometers in size. It would take only 40 molecules of water inside a tubule to resonate with the quantum field. So that is what I believe is the connection.
And did you or have you done any research or heard any research on abductees' brain function different than a person that has never claimed to be abducted?
I think people who have psychic ability have a default state, which makes us much more sensitive to, once you start giving up ego and you start living from someplace else inside you, and long-term meditation does that, when your default state becomes very sensitive, you pick up all kinds of things.
And why do you think people that have been abducted, near-death experience, traumatic experience, car accident, why do you think so many people recover with psychic ability? Do you think they always had it and this just enhanced it? Or do you think this activated something that they didn't have
Again,
before?
I think we're looking at high levels of DMT, which is an endogenous agent. And so trauma victims get it, meditative people get it. You can enhance DMT with taking DMT by itself.
Right.
And people who take DMT, extended DMT, talk about, almost inevitably, they talk about conversations with aliens. So it's the high level of DMT, I think, is a factor too.
And do you think the DMT, right?
Yes.
Do you think it when this is activated, like with a visitation or
Near-death
abductive
experience, yeah.
or do you think this is just something that spikes and remains, or do we see decline? It decline as a week, 2 weeks, month after the incident.
People who had high levels of trauma maintain it.
Maintain it.
Yeah. Episodic trauma, like one of the things I did during my service time was take the trauma histories of tortured POWs. And they maintain, if they maintain sanity, they maintain a high level of intuitive ability. I'm sure John McCain had high levels
I'm sure he did.
of intuitive ability. His ability to be with people and to see beyond the particularities of a political moment was profound. So some people maintain it. I had a near-death experience myself.
Oh, you did?
Yes, about 8 years ago. I had what is called a subarachnoid hemorrhage. It was on my left side. Left side of the brain operates language. So I completely lost language for 3 days. Couldn't speak, did not have language in my thought, but I was aware, completely awake and aware. It was the most blissful experience I've ever had, and I was almost certainly close to death.
You know what you sound like, though?
What?
An abductee. You just said that she woke up,
Oh,
she was
my
fearful,
gosh. Holy smokes.
but she was calm, she
Yeah.
was aware.
Wow.
That's exactly
Thank
what.
you, thank you for pointing that out.
Of course. I was just like, wait a minute, didn't you just tell me that story? Wow, that's great. So it's almost very similar.
Very similar.
To an
indeed. You bet.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's crazy, and that's fascinating. I'm
sorry to convince.
I know.
Confess this to your audience.
No, it's great though, and I think, but that's relatable. So people that have went through that,
yes,
then they know
Yeah.
what that is, and now you know what abductee is.
Yeah.
Felt like.
Thank you.
In your bio it says the evidence of ET visitations is substantial, but what is substantial, and who names that? Who names this?
Who names substantial? I don't know. When it starts, when you get so many pilots report, and I hear recently here in the studio that Navy pilots can now report UFOs.
Which
is
thank you, Bonnie.
Great. Thank you, Bonnie. Yes.
But no, that's fascinating. That was it in December is when the Navy Department actually released video of a Navy pilot seeing it. Why? And just as being part of the military yourself, do you think this is getting a little closer to disclosure? I know we're getting into a little bit.
I hope so.
To where
the next president has to.
I know. I talked to many people before the 2016 election, and that was one of the reasons they really wanted Hillary to win, because they thought she would disclose this, which we'll see. Hopefully the next president will. And our time's getting. We only have about 10 minutes left, and so I want to ask about the resonance theory. Could you talk about that?
I don't know as much about resonance theory as I'm sure Nassim Haramein does. So, as I understand his work, and my apologies to him because I heard him talk last year, and just hearing him talk, there were certain ideas that he gave me that I've been contemplating this whole year. I didn't really read his books. I didn't join his Resonance Academy.
Right.
I wanted to, when I'm faced with a complex problem, I prefer to take the problem into myself and really give it some long-term meditation and thought. So a lot of his ideas made a whole lot of sense to me, and one of them is that because the universe is a vibrational field energetically, that we are able to apprehend remotely in that vibrational field. That's what remote viewing is,
Right.
is an example of that. Psychic ability is like that. So we're somehow attuned, I think, through the vibrational characteristics of water and the microtubule system to be sensitive to even the remotest vibration. That's what I understand the resonance is about. It's that we're in resonance constantly, but practically we have to live within a certain number of dimensions. Otherwise, we couldn't get around. So I don't live in the 10th dimension every day, or I must somehow, but mostly I operate in this, conventional dimension.
And I know with Contact coming up just in a few weeks, and you've been a part of it. How has Contact changed your view? Because sometimes people go with they want to learn, they want to see, and see other lectures and experts in the field. But how has it changed you hearing some of these amazing speakers?
I came as a skeptic, and there's always part of me that listens to what people have to say with a sense of, well, show me a little bit more.
Right.
So I've changed in that I'm much more convinced that this is a real field of study. Number one, that aliens are real. They're here now. Hybridization program probably has been going on for a while.
Right.
We're seeing aliens in certain settings now. You go to a Tipper concert at midnight, in Boulder at the Arise Music Festival in July and August, and you will see aliens. For some reason, his music attracts aliens, and they don't like to be seen because they're not used to us.
Right.
We look weird to them, but you'll see them.
Well, I think I'm trying to think. Oh, we've interviewed so many people. I think it was last week. And I'm trying to remember his name, but we're talking about sound,
Yes.
and I think that's a universal language.
Yes.
Is sound,
Yes.
and animals, mammals, fish,
Even
every
trees.
and I think this is something that is universal, and I think that's is well, actually, if you think about in the 1970s when Close Encounters, how did they was through the music.
That's right.
So I mean I love that movie, and I hope they never remake it because I don't think they could do it justice. Well, before we get out of here, again, tell us everybody about your lecture coming up. Again, tell us what you're going to be talking about.
Be talking on June the 2nd at 7:30 in the morning. I only will take early risers. It's a very non-lecture lecture. I simply am going to be talking. I like questions. So anybody who's awake at 7:30 in the morning on June the 2nd at Indian Springs, where we're having Contact in the Desert, I'd love to see you.
And people in the chat room saying, thank you for the beware of false gifts, and also saying it's very fascinating because a lot of people haven't got to hear you before, maybe, and I think this is just the beginning. And keep doing your work, and we appreciate you coming in the studio and seeing us here.
Yeah.
And we're going to be there. Captain Ron and myself will be there, and we want to see you there. Come up and say hi, and hopefully you'll make it out. But if not, we'll be there for you. We'll interview some of the greatest speakers that Contact has, and every year they just blow your mind with the people there.
Indeed they do.
All right, until next time, this is Tony Sweet and Captain Ron. Michael Johnson, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, see you soon. Bye.